Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Today we are doing my May reading wrap up. These are all of the books that I have completed so far in the month of May. We do have about 10 days left. I don't know. I don't do math. We talk about this in every video. So stay tuned for my vlogs if you would like to see what other books I might complete this month, or Goodreads or any of those other book social media websites, because I post reviews on all of them. It's an obsession, but let's get into it. To start the month, I read the shortest contemporary or literary fiction book on my TBR according to Goodreads, and that is Kick the Latch by Katherine Scanlon. To my understanding, by the author's note at the end of the book and the description on the sleeve of the book, is that this is based on a real horse trainer named Sonia. I'm not sure why this is considered contemporary fiction if it is based on a true person and her experiences, as this book is her recounting her life story. Maybe the author chose to embellish some things in Sonia's life. I'm really not sure. But when I'm reading this, I was just wondering what the point was, because we don't really know who Sonia is as a person. So I don't think this is supposed to be a character-driven story. But when I think back to this book, this is basically like reading a memoir of this woman. And don't you usually think those are about somebody's story, about them, their life experience? But that's not my main takeaway from the book. I'm really confused by this character work. I wish we would have had a little backstory before going into it. We do start with Sonia's childhood going all through her career to her retirement. But I wish there would have been a little more backing of why is Sonia writing this memoir? Why is she recounting her life? What is the point? The atmosphere doesn't play a huge part in the story, but as this book did come to me from Paris, I was not expecting an American setting. It is taking place in Iowa, of all places. I don't think you can get much more American than Iowa, right smack dab in the middle of the country. Rustic would be the word I would use to describe this book. Americana would be another word to describe the atmosphere, as we are seeing an example of the American dream. And is the American dream a reality? Can it happen? Is it achievable? Does it exist? Love those themes, and it's something we come across a lot in books, and I think particularly in the 2020s. And I do wonder if the year 2020 itself did have an impact on making that such a big theme in American literature in this decade. I don't know, but it would be a fun topic to dive into. So if you have any opinions on that, let me know in the comments. The writing style I did really enjoy. It's blunt, straightforward, to the point. I know that's not going to be for everybody. I know a lot of people like flowery and lush. No, you're not going to get that here. As I said, it's blunt. Going back to the American dream, this is going to be so cheesy, but like the pointy picket fence, that's the writing style. But this is really how people talk. The dialect is spot on for how people talk, and I do think this would translate very well on audiobook. I did read the ebook on my Kindle of this, but I do think this would be a really fun book to read on audiobook, as it is this woman telling her story with dialect that is real and how people really talk. The plot is very unique and different, as this is taking a look at the horse world and the world of horse racing. I think most Americans focus on our own Kentucky Derby weekend, and after that they don't think about it for a year, but we're seeing all the different facets of it and all the people, all the steps on the ladder it takes to have that horse win the Derby, have a horse compete in a race. I did not realize all this world around it, and how when we watch the Kentucky Derby every year, we see the people in the hats and the fancy dresses, probably expensive alcohol and cigars. It's very bougie. Like, I don't know how I would fit in there. I would love to go. It is a bucket list sporting event I would like to go to. But I know the suites, one time I looked at the price. Obviously I wouldn't go in a suite, but I looked at the prices of that and I was like, who's affording this? But in this, we peel back the layers. It is actually like a really gritty world of getting to that and getting to those big events, of what makes all of that possible. And I do think that's a lot of things in life. There's typically a seedy underbelly, and seedy, that's being dramatic about it, but it is a very gritty world. And seeing what jockeys go through, I had no idea, but it makes sense of the things that they go through to be a jockey. at a professional level. So all this was very informative, and I do appreciate it for that. But this is one that I would recommend with a maybe, as I did learn a lot, but I don't know really what the point of the character work was. My graphic novel that I read in May was Poe Stories and Poems, a graphic novel adaptation by Gareth Hines. I got this at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia, and it got the job done. We got to see all these different stories by him, some lesser well known, and some are his big ones like The Raven. I'm sure we've all heard of The Raven. There's an NFL team named after it, for crying out loud. But some of these, like The Mask of the Red Death, I think is so timely. Obviously it came out over 100 years ago, a whole different world, but you can't help compare it to our day and age now, where I think of COVID, how, you know, everybody, the normal person, we had to go through all this stuff of places being shut down, jobs being cut, but the rich are in their mansions partying, having a good old time, when they're like, oh, but y'all have to do this, but we don't have to. The rules don't abide to us. And I think even just with other things that we've seen in life where it seems like the laws and rules don't apply to the rich, but they do to the working man. That was a big common theme in The Mask of the Red Death. The Cask of Amontillado, I even got Eat the Rich vibes of just, we had this guy who is, I don't know if he's like a count or something, but he is like tricking this guy and putting him in this situation that he can't really get out of. Poe is a fun author to discuss, of understanding what his works were trying to say, and I do think what makes a classic is if it is timeless and that people in any time period can relate to it. And all that stuff I was just saying happened 100 years, 150 years after these poems and stories were published, but we can still relate 100 years later. I think that's incredible and a testament to Poe's writing. But my issue with this was, on some stories it was really dark and I had a hard time seeing what was happening on the page. Like, I would have to get the book at the perfect angle where there might not be a glare on it for me to get a full understanding. So the art was kind of hard to decipher at times. But other times, like in this one, I think this is Annabelle Lee, where I was just constantly finding new things in the artwork. And I love when art is kind of a scavenger hunt and you're trying to find all these different pieces the longer you look at the art. But I do love that there is a graphic novel adaptation of Poe's work, because sometimes that works better for other people than actually reading just straight up words, having the pictures. I'm a very visual person personally, that it can just really amplify that reading experience and bring these stories to a wider audience. And this one is a Junior Library Guild selection, so exposing younger audiences, because in high school I think some of us did struggle with the reading, but I think seeing the pictures would have really helped a reading experience. And all this wasn't around when I was in high school, so I'm sure that teachers now are being like, hey, if you want to check out Poe, there's a graphic novel for it. And I think that's fantastic to, as I said, make it more accessible to a wider audience of people. Next book that I have to talk about is the 6th book in a series. So would I recommend it? If you've made it this far in the series, yeah, but it's not my favorite book in the series. I'm talking about The Lily and the Lion by Maurice Drouin. This is a modern French classic. It is blurbed by George R. R. Martin, as this is the original Game of Thrones, according to him, and a lot of world leaders and big names. Like, it is a diverse crowd of people that like this series, and I'm one of them. I don't think I'm anything like George R. R. Martin or Vladimir Putin, but I enjoyed this series. But you can just see how influential this historical fiction series has been on these genres of historical fiction and even fantasy. George R. R. Martin does talk about in the foreword of the book, sure, this series isn't a fantastical series, but that medieval setting of court intrigue and the politics and wars and battles that were going on has definitely been influential on the high fantasy genre. And in the medieval setting, we see in a lot of high fantasy books. So if you are somebody who likes court intrigue in your historical fiction or in your fantasy, I do think you should give this series a go. Yes, it did come out 50 years ago, and it did, this is translated as well. But it's still so accessible to read in this day and age. But if you're wondering what it's about, it is about the fall of the Capetian dynasty in France. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on who came next? Was it Voila? I'm blanking. I am so sorry on that. I am somebody who loves French history, but this is about the end of the Capetian dynasty, the 100 Years' War, that era in French history. I did love our English sections. The English chapters were my favorite ones. We have, is it Edward the Third? Yeah, Edward the Third, Philippa of Hainault, who I am descended from them, so that's kind of cool. So I did enjoy the English chapters, and I really loved our female characters in this. I know a lot of people are like, oh, these old men, they don't know how to write women, but I do think Maurice Druin does a fantastic job. I think his female characters are his standout characters, and in this one, we're seeing the end of a series. There's one more book in the series, and I don't know if the English translation is out yet. I'm gonna have to do some research on that. But we have one more book. I've read this series the second time. I haven't got this high in the series yet because, again, the English translations were just coming out in this edition that I've been reading. That is from HarperCollins. But yes, if any of what I've said appeals to you, yes, I would recommend this series if you love the medieval world. Another book that, yes, I would recommend, and again, is coming from that same time period. This is from the 1970s, and that is Burr by Gore Vidal. Burr's my favorite founding father. He was a wild man from New Jersey. That's how I describe him. Very different, very imaginative. He didn't see him, or in the book, he didn't see himself as a dreamer. But I had this great discussion in my vlog and in the comments. I think to be a doer, you have to be a dreamer first. But I don't think all dreamers are doers. Take that as you will. But let's talk about the characters in this. Obviously, Aaron Burr is our main character, but he is not a POV. When I heard about this book, thank you to the people on Reddit who recommended the Narratives of Empire series, and great time to read it as we have the 250th birthday of the United States. Great series to pick up for that. As I was introduced to this book, I thought we would be following Burr as the main POV from his childhood all the way to his death. That's typically how historical fiction does it. No, we are meeting Burr as a senior citizen who has already done all his exploits that he is famous for. Burr is a man who is a villain in American history. He's infamous, notorious. He's not viewed well. And this book is taking that American legend, like an onion, and unraveling him to see why he did the things that he did. How did he feel about them afterwards? Because obviously there's always going to be consequences for your actions. And especially at a high level as being vice president, yeah, there were consequences. And he definitely felt them. But we do not have Burr as our main POV. We have Charlie Schuyler. Charlie is a writer. He is also a law student, but he's hesitant to take the bar exam. So he is writing to pass the time. And like a lot of us, being a lawyer is his, like, working in the law office is his real job, but he really wants to be a writer. So he takes up this gig to write this story about Aaron Burr and Aaron Burr's life story. But why is he doing that? We have a presidential election coming up between Henry Clay and Martin Van Buren. And this is a time where in the 1830s where abolitionists and anti-abolitionalists are crashing heads with one another. They do not want Martin Van Buren to be elected. It is rumored that Martin Van Buren was the illegitimate child of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr is a very infamous figure in American history, so if people know that, they're not going to want Van Buren in the White House. So they are trying to get proof, definite proof, that Van Buren is the child of Burr. It's fun to see how the media has changed, because Charlie and his friends are the media, and they are trying to skew the election one way or another. He is the one who is unraveling the story of Aaron Burr. Charlie, I didn't feel really a connection towards, as Burr is our main character. And with Charlie, we would get excerpts about like his own personal life, but I didn't really care for them. But I do think that for a lot of readers, that is going to be a breath of fresh air, because when we are sitting down with Aaron Burr, we're getting a lot of history thrown at us. We will talk about that in a little bit. But I do think this was a great portrayal of these historical figures. Pretty much this whole cast are legit historical figures or inspired by historical figures. And I have read nonfiction about Burr and therefore have learned about some other people in his life. And I do think Gore Vidal did a fantastic job at bringing those egos and these big characters and putting them on page and still having them feel like that. Like some of these characters, like George Washington, felt godlike reading about him. I don't think I mentioned that in the vlog, but I was just like, oh my gosh, this is George Washington we're reading about. So I do think he did a great job at putting these legends on page. The atmosphere, this is taking place predominantly in New York City, and we are seeing a New York City that is ever changing, and we still are. New York is always doing something new, but Aaron Burr is of old New York. Yes, he is originally from New Jersey, but has spent the majority of his life in New York. And we have Charlie's generation, who are the younger generation, he's in his 20s, who are the new New York. And it's fun comparing the two. But it was really interesting just seeing America between the Revolution and the Civil War. I didn't realize all the buildup that led to the Civil War, and how long that buildup was, how many decades it took to get to that. But knowing that there were just some, I don't want to say heated rivalries, but there were just some, just factions and political parties that were crashing with one another. And that was something, a lot of the political jargon did go over my head. My knowledge on American government and politics, and especially this era, is not too strong. So that's just ignorance on my part, where a lot of that I was just like, I don't know what this party stands for, what this party stands for. So I was kind of confused, but I do think it didn't hinder my reading experience too much overall. And about how when this book was published. So the book is taking place in the 1830s. It was published during the Nixon era, and I'm reading this in the 2020s. It's fun to see the scandals of all those eras come together, and how politicians of each era, how they're going to be remembered, as this is about Burr, who was living 250 years ago, and how he is remembered now in American history. It makes you think, when this was being written, how will Richard Nixon be remembered? And then when I'm reading this, how will Donald Trump be remembered? It's really intriguing to think about that, of how when we're 250 years away from those people, what kind of books are going to be getting written. But this writing style, it's a lot. It is very dense, and I will say even the audiobook is quite slow. You're taking in a lot of information. There is a lot of info dumping, especially with American history. We have Aaron Burr, who is recounting his life, and he was there for so many pivotal moments in American history. With Charlie's sections, they are like a bit of fresh air, because you're not having all this history being told at you. You're getting, again, just seeing his day-to-day life in New York City, and how he's going about his journey of finding himself and finding out what he wants in life. That the history can be a lot. As I said, I did have some background knowledge before reading this, so some of it I was just like, okay, I know all of this, but I still learned new stuff as well, and I think that's really awesome when historical fiction can do that. And I did love that we're seeing American history through one person, not being Aaron Burr. He was there for so much of American history that it was seeing it told through a person. I really liked that and thought it was a unique take. There were still plot twists in this. The last one was just like, oh my gosh, I wish we had a little bit more, even though this book is nearly 500 pages. I would have liked a little bit more building on that. I think it was a sudden shock to throw in at the last pages of the book, but I did really enjoy this, and I will be continuing the series reading about Lincoln next. My book club pick is what came next, and that is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. At the end of this, I was left wanting a deeper connection with our main character of Eddie. I do feel like we really got to know Eddie as a person. We saw his development, and I understand who he was as a person, but I wish I had had a deeper connection towards him. And I do think the pacing, the writing in this is where that fault might be. This is very fast-paced, and I was really scared that I wasn't absorbing everything as it was so fast, and I'm scared about the sticking power of this book. So I do wish we would have gotten to know the character a little bit more, gotten to spend more time with him to form a connection with him. But the atmosphere in here is really good. We have all these different depictions of Eddie's different experiences in life, where it does really have them all starkly in your mind of what each one was, and it's very vivid at building these places. Really makes you use your senses, and I do love when a writer can do that and make an immersive atmosphere for the reader. But with the writing, it is very reflective, it is thought-provoking, but very fast. I do worry about the sticking power, because I do think there's a lot of wisdom here, and I do think this will be a great book to revisit at different stages in my life. But with it being so fast, it's like we're getting a surface level look at the plot. And I will say, with the writing style, it could get preachy at times, where it's like the author didn't trust us. Now, this was his first dabble with fiction, so I do think that has changed, as I have read another book by him that came out 20 years into his career. But we have everything presented to us on a platter. I like to think for myself, and I do think I would have felt more for this story if I had time to digest it myself and to form my own thoughts and ideas and have my own personal experience with the book, rather than the author tell me bluntly everything, what he's trying to say and what he means. I would have liked to think more for myself while reading this book, rather than having the author hold my hand and tell me exactly what is going on here. I do think this is an important read, and I think that it is interesting to see all these different depictions of what heaven and what the afterlife could look like, and how it can be different for different people, and showing that every person you meet, every interaction that you have in life does matter, and there is a purpose for every little thing that happens. He took my beliefs and put them perfectly into a book. I love the spiritual journey of this book, and I do think anybody of any religion or denomination can read this book and still get something out of it, and I think that's pretty powerful. So yes, this is a book that I would recommend. Next book has a very different writing style, and that is The Details by Yai Yenberry. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but this is translated from the Swedish by Kira Josephson. This is another book where I feel like we really do get to know the character, and it's told in a unique way, as we get to find out who this character is as a person through the relationships in her life, all different kinds of relationships. Very unique character building that we're getting right there. This is a nameless narrator, and I do feel like I know her, but I don't have a connection to her. But as I was sitting down and writing my review, I didn't realize how much I enjoyed the atmosphere. It's magical, nostalgic, immersive, and I really didn't expect that from this kind of book. The writing style, it's very much long run-on sentences, and that is in the English translation, and apparently in the original Swedish it's even worse. I've never seen Swedish written out, so I don't know what's typical over there, but if y'all do, let me know. I'm very curious to see the different translations. But there were instances, the writing was so beautiful and reflective. Y'all know I love that for my writing styles, but it was so very long that it convoluted the story for me, opposite to the other book of Being So Fast, where it lost its point, because I'm like, I've been reading this for so long, what is the author trying to say here? Where it lost the point for me. With the plot, there's not a plot. This is a character-driven story. We are seeing themes and ideas of how our relationships impact us, and what relationships do to the human experience. This was a fine book. It's one I would recommend with a maybe, because it is an award-winning book and very high praised in Sweden. Didn't connect with the characters, and the writing was very lengthy, but there was relatability with the character, and there was just such a magical, immersive atmosphere that I did enjoy. The last book that I have to talk about is Perfect Tunes by Emily Gould. This one is another piece of contemporary fiction, but I did do it as a mood read, so I did follow along with the audiobook, which I don't recommend. I didn't really vibe with the narrator with this kind of story in particular. But we have our character of Laura, who we start out in the early 2000s in New York City. She's just moved there after college in hopes of having a musical career. And those chapters of her in her early and mid 20s were so relatable. She is a young woman who is trying to find herself, and she acts like she doesn't really care what people think, but really she does. And I'll be vulnerable here and say I'm the same way. I like to be like, I don't care what people think of me, but yeah, I care. I think we all do. But it is very vulnerable in that way. And I think it's a character that a lot of young women and women in general, because even if you are older, you've been there, you were in your 20s once, that you can find relatability in. But as the story progressed, I didn't really like her. Very relatable, and just shows the complexities of relationships, whether that be with romantic partners, in-laws, your child, co-workers, friends. And I think it really showcases what it's like to be a young mother and see how that can impact your relationships, because you'll have other friends who are young, but they haven't settled down yet. Then you have the older moms that like the school pickup who are kind of looking down at her being like, oh, you don't really know what it's like to be a mom just because she's young. Like, please don't do that. If you're a mom, don't do that. That's rude. But with the atmosphere, it overall, with the character work was bratty, where we are seeing this character for near 20 years of her life, but I don't think she truly developed as a person. I think she stayed pretty immature throughout her life, but I do question, is it because she went through these traumatic experiences so young that they made her stay a 22-year-old mentally forever? Was it because she hit fame kind of at an early level and got stuck at that age? I don't think it was that deep. I just think that it was poorly written. If I'm being honest, I feel bad saying that. That is kind of brutal for me, harsh coming from me. With that being bratty, this felt like a teen drama that would have been on the CW or ABC Family in the early 2010s, which I did love that. I had a fun time reading this. It was campy. But this book that is geared for adults, should it be reading immature like that? That's where I'm kind of questioning things. I'm like, this is geared for adults, very much so, because there's a strong emphasis in the first quarter of all these sex scenes where I'm like, I don't need to be getting all these details. For what this story is trying to do, I don't need all this. But we got a lot of sex scenes, so if you're somebody who doesn't like that, it does eventually stop. But the first part of the book is very like sex heavy. I get it, sex, drugs, rock and roll, that's the lifestyle our character is living, as this is a music story. And it is very unique because music stories have been very prevalent in this decade. Daisy Jones and the Six, which is one of my all-time favorite reads, but it made a lot of influx of these kinds of books. But this one is very unique, as we are also getting a story of motherhood and how life, you can set out these goals and things that you want in life, but it's not always going to work out and be a little gift box with a bow on top. That's not what happens. Life happens, and this is a character that I think is very real. She's not likable. We go through this journey with her, and there is a lot of relatability, and I love the nostalgic 2000s setting and how I said this does read like an ABC Family show. But I loved ABC Family. I love those shows. So if I read this back when I was 15, this would have been a 5-star book. But I still think this is a good book, and it's one that I would maybe recommend that you give a go if you are looking for a musical story, if you are looking for a story of motherhood, but our main character is a bit bratty. I read the audiobook, and I said I didn't recommend the audiobook, but this is very long-winded with a lot of details where it seems like the author had a word count or a page number count that she was supposed to hit, because we don't need all these details. There is one scene describing, sorry for being vulgar, but describing a blunt, and it's like a ludicrously rolled blunt. I'm like, who is using that word to describe that? Like, why? I honestly think that there was a word count that the author was trying to hit, so I'm glad I did do the audiobook, because I would be getting mad and frustrated if I did have to read that physically. I also completed one puzzle in the month of May, and it is the Doggone Days 500-piece puzzle from Mud Puppy. Y'all know Mud Puppy is my favorite, and it's actually a puppy puzzle. I got this from Christmas. For Christmas. Thank you to my family members who got me this. This was a lot of fun to put together. I only said that, but I did this very quickly, so I don't know if that means it's on the easier side or if I just had a lot more time since I was listening to the Emily Gould audiobook while I was doing this. But I had a good time putting this together. Those are all of the books and the one puzzle that I completed in the month of May. Let me know what was your favorite book and your least favorite book that you read in the month of May. And as always, if you made it through this whole video, leave a flower emoji in the comments below. And as always, comment, rate, and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that notification bell to be notified when all my videos go live. I'll see you on my next one. Bye. If you are familiar with my videos, you're used to seeing Sherman at the end of them. Sadly, Sherman has since passed away, but I would still like to encourage you guys to help your local shelters. Sherman was at the Darlington County Humane Society in rural South Carolina. I always have their link down below in the description if you guys would like to help them, but also help your local shelters as well. You can do that by donating, sharing posts like this one, volunteering, fostering, and adopting, which it's great to do all of those things. Great to help your community, great to help the animals in your community, and I cannot recommend it enough. All of my pets were rescues, they were strays or from animal shelters, and I love them so much, and I know how much love they can give, so knowing these pets at the shelter can equally give that much love, it's amazing. And y'all should totally take part and help out those local animal shelter pets, and please help them.